First of all, they fucking lied to us about this guy. This didn't happen yesterday. We've been gaslighted and lied to about the president of the United States functioning. Secondly, who is running the country? This guy is not sitting down and figuring out any kind of geopolitical strategy for the most powerful country in the history of the world to deal with World War III potentially generating issues. Who is making those decisions? Blew it the first time around and we ended up nuking ourselves to death. But I'm going to be a part of a renaissance, of a reestablishment of humanity on a greater, more humane foundation or something like that. I have to be a part of the solution to this problem. I can't just surrender. How do you come back from nuclear war? Where do you begin? From each according to his ability, to each according to his need? That's not a new idea. We've got the 20th century to point to look at the implications of having that idea brought to fruition with real government power, with armies behind it, with the state police behind it, and so on and so forth. And as far as I could tell, it was a disaster. They are hoist on their own petard. He campaigned in 2020. I'm going to appoint a woman my vice president, a black woman. So they appointed Kamala Harris. Generously put, she's unfit for the highest position, and she's just an but they can't get rid of her. They can't replace her. He can't announce, thank you, but your service for 4 years is appreciated, but we're going to move on, because that would alienate blacks and women and progressives or whatever.
That was the most depressing thing I have ever seen. Like, network level, what are we doing putting this person, never mind running for president, on television at all? I never watch cable news anymore, but I turned on the CNN panel after the debate was over.
Yeah, I saw it.
Unreal. Like, that whole row of people who are there to be partisan hacks are all saying the same thing, which is like, whoa, this guy can't be president. And Van Jones practically in tears.
Yeah.
Being like, I can't even talk about the politics. I love this guy. I don't want to see this happen to him.
Well, I mean, there's some obvious things to say here. First of all, they fucking lied to us about this guy. This didn't happen yesterday. We've been gaslighted and lied to about the president of the United States functioning. Secondly, who is running the country? This guy is not sitting down and figuring out any kind of geopolitical strategy for the most powerful country in the history of the world to deal with World War III potentially generating issues. Who is making those decisions?
Yeah.
This is a democracy. These people are supposed to be accountable to the voters. The electoral prospects of the Democrats seem to me to be a relatively minor issue here when we're talking about the stewardship of the government of the United States of America, it seems to me.
My wife keeps asking me why he is the nominee, and I can't give an answer. Is there a clear explanation? Is it him making this decision? Like, he is not willing to back out, or is it the Democratic Party that decided that this is the candidate, or they're saving money on primaries, or why? Why?
So it's a little bit of both. Obviously Biden has to want to run again, to run again. So he's on board with it. But yeah, the DNC plays a part in it because they set up the primaries, they run the primaries, they apportion funding, and then there's signals inside. And very, very early on, they must have told people Biden's our guy. He's the incumbent. Historically, incumbents have a much better chance of winning than running a new candidate. So there was no primary process, basically.
They are hoist on their own petard. He campaigned in 2020. I'm going to appoint a woman my vice president, a black woman. So they appointed Kamala Harris. Generously put, she's unfit for the highest position, and she's just an but they can't get rid of her.
Yeah.
They can't replace her. He can't announce, thank you, but your service for 4 years is appreciated, but we're going to move on, because that would alienate blacks and women and progressives or whatever.
And if you're a plausible candidate to be a Democratic president like Gretchen Whitmer or J.B. Pritzker or Gavin Newsom, you're going, I'm pretty young. I'm not going to get involved. I'm going to wait next time around. and have a real campaign.
Well, anyway.
Yeah, anyway. So should we move on?
Yeah, we should. I have no idea what to say in response to the provocation of the moment.
That's okay.
But I await your prompting.
All right, so I guess by way of starting this, I should just talk about how I came across this phenomenon, which is billionaires, super rich people who are planning their escape or figuring out what they're going to do should any number of doomsday scenarios for the world, for the US, whatever, take place. So I remember very clearly where I was when I first heard about this phenomenon. I was doing research at the New York Public Library's main branch, and I was taking a lunch break, and I walked over to some cafe thing to go get a salad and read my New Yorker that I had with me, and I flip it open to a piece by Evan Osnos, where he is talking to a bunch of people who have these plans, who are making these plans. And as I read the piece, I just felt some kind of visceral something. I could not believe what I was reading because it's such a dystopian scenario, right? You have people saying, some people say we're closer to sort of nuclear war than we've been since 1960, whatever. Some people say that, we're talking about catastrophic climate change and the worst case scenario sort of projections that people have for that. We're talking about growing social unrest. We're talking about riots in the cities, right? All of these kind of dystopian scenarios that people lay out. And the most resource-rich people in our society are asking themselves what they're going to do about it. And the solution that they come up with is equally dystopian, which is to say, well, we need an escape plan. Not we need a plan to pool our resources and figure out a way to mitigate these problems before they get out of control. Not where people of great influence, let's talk to lawmakers or whoever about what we can do. We run major corporations and hedge funds and whatever else. Let's see what we can do to use the power of our institutions to do this. No, they start talking to people who design nuclear bunkers, who can wire these buildings to be completely self-sustaining, or they're buying land in New Zealand or in Alaska where they can go insulate themselves from the worst effects of these things, right? They're not plausible targets for nuclear war. They're relatively isolated. You can get a lot of land. They won't be as badly affected by climate change as other places, in the worst case scenario. And the piece, the Osnos piece, and a lot of other subsequent pieces that have come from this, Douglas Rushkoff wrote a book about it, talk about all of this subsidiary things that you have to think about. All right, well, you got a bunker somewhere. You're probably living in New York City or you're living in LA or wherever. It's not going to be in New York or LA. It's going to be somewhere you have to get to. How are you going to get there? You're going to need a pilot. What are you going to do? Tell that pilot that he's flying you and your family to escape nuclear holocaust, right? And then being like, thanks for the ride. Bye-bye. No, you have to figure out a way to compensate that pilot. Well, what about social unrest? What about people coming for your stuff, right? Well, you need a security force who's going to get you to the plane, who's going to get you to the bunker, who's going to make sure that you're safe in the bunker. What do you do to them? Well, you can't just be like, hey, you just sit here, I'll pay you $150,000 a year in money that may or may not be worth anything 6 months from now, and you just sit tight and don't worry about your family. No, you got to bring them in. So there's all of these really weird things that you have to think about, which just makes the situation equally dystopian. And if it was just a couple people doing this, I'd be like, all right, well, rich people are weird. But it seems that there is a actual mini industry catering to these people and the things that they believe or are led to believe that they'll need to help their post-doomsday survival, to make it to allow them to survive, they think.
So what is the scale of this thing? How many people are buying bunkers?
Well, you don't really know because, of course, no one's going to be public with that information. And I have a sense that it's a really scammy space, because you need the money up front, obviously. So, you're going to pay for your self-perpetuating tilapia farm that will provide you with fish for all eternity, you're going to pay for that up front. You don't know if it's going to work until it's already too late. So,
Okay, I have a reaction.
uh-huh.
I have a couple of reactions. One is there is a robust survivalist industry out there of people selling goods and services to ordinary individuals, not billionaires, who want to stock their basements with canned goods and arm themselves in the event of a collapse of civil unrest and learn how to use those weapons. And these advertisements I'm seeing every time I go to certain websites where buy gold, which is a hedge against the collapse of the currency. So survivalism is not something unique to billionaires. But if you've got $1 billion, man, $1 billion, that's 1,000 million dollars. That's, if I spend $1 million on something, I just spent 0.1% of my wealth. If I've got $1 billion, that's a lot of money. Marry the survivalist instinct with $1 billion bankroll, and I'm not surprised that instead of stocking their basement in their suburban home with canned goods, they're buying tracts of land in remote locations because they got $1 billion, and that's how they express their survivalist instinct. So that's one thing I think. The other thing I think, given that they got $1 billion, is these things aren't mutually exclusive. I can lobby my Congress. I can, support causes and movements and everything. And I can hedge against the, perhaps unlikely, but you can't rule it out prospect that things are going to completely fall apart. I can do both of those things. So if I were a billionaire with a survivalist orientation, I could defend myself against your critique, Mark, by simply saying, look, I'm just taking care of myself and my family just like you would do, but I got $1 billion, so I'm doing it differently than you would do it. But I could also say that, I understand all these different obligations that I have as a leader of the society, and I'm taking care of my end of it. I'm just also taking care of my survivalist concerns.
Yeah. So, I'm sure there are plenty of people who are trying to think about these big problems and trying to do what they can. I'm not sure about that, but let's just say there are. Still, what interests me is not so much the sort of panicky idea like, the billionaires are, something that we don't, and they're abandoning society. Because first of all, I think it's pretty safe to say that none of this stuff is going to come into play anytime in the near future. Nikita raises his eyebrows. It's the impulse to me that's interesting. It's the cut and run impulse that's there. And beyond the kind of weirdness of the setup, okay, so let's say it happens. 1,000 nuclear bombs fall all across the world, and you make it to your bunker safely, and you get your family there, you get your private security there, you get your pilot there, you do whatever you do, like turn the thing on the vault door that keeps you and your family safe, and then you're down there. And what do you got? You got your family, which is good. You got, I don't know, every movie, TV show, album ever recorded on some massive hard drive. You've got internet access, I assume. You've got a big fat tub full of tilapia. You've probably got an indoor pool or something. You've got books. Well, what are you doing down there? You know what I mean? At that point, don't certain existential questions start rearing their ugly head? Questions that you will have a lot of time to contemplate.
Yeah. I thought about that too, about what life is like when there is no life. There's no life outside of your compound. Maybe the compounds communicate with each other. Maybe they have a network where, across the oceans, they can touch in with each other. But what are you living for? But I want to go back to the mechanics of it a little bit. You got $1 billion. It's not a bunch of greenbacks of $100 bills in a vault somewhere. It's a set of electronic accounts with banks where the only way you actually get to buy anything is that you make a transfer with the system, and the system acknowledges the transfer. Is that still going to be operative in a world in which nuclear war has broken out or civil order has collapsed? So I don't really know how. Is it gold? Why would I take a gold bar from somebody in return for something real when I'm then dependent upon being able to cut off a little piece of that gold bar and give it to somebody else for something real, when the whole structure of expectation and commitment, that system of acknowledgement of the value of the currency has collapsed. What I can't eat the gold. It's only valuable to me because I think someone else is going to think it's valuable. But does that anticipation survive the end of the world?
Well, this is like another kind of like interesting economic question, right? In this worst case scenario, everything, like someone just takes a giant magnet to all records of financial transactions. Everything's wiped out. The systems are gone, right? There's no record of how much money you have. Now, if that's what you're foreseeing, then it makes sense to invest as much as possible in this safe house before the fact, because you assume that most of your quote unquote wealth is going to be wiped out. You'll have, I'm sure, gold bars with you or whatever, which, you know, if it comes down to it, they make great weapons, right? You can throw them at invaders or but so you'll have to do all your investing in the front end, precisely because you're not sure if there will be such a thing as financial value in the after times. I guess you can gauge the seriousness of a person by saying, how much are you willing to put in there? Because if this is where you think it's going, you're going to want to max that value out as much as money as you can put into it in order to ensure that it's truly self-sustaining is the amount of money that it makes sense to invest in that, right?
Well, I mean, you got to take into account that you're not certain this is going to happen. This is a risk. So you want to balance the investment and the insurance against the loss of civil order against the investments that you want to make in the event that there's not a loss of civil order. You don't want to put everything into the bunker. That's what I'm saying. But I have a prior concern, security. So you're right. You have to keep yourself safe from people who want to enter your bunker or take your provisions. So you hire somebody. You're paying them money. We've talked about that. But I guess you're also paying them. You can be in the bunker too, so you don't have to expose yourself to the radiation. But then they're the ones with the guns. Why isn't it their bunker? How is it your bunker? Why isn't the guy who decides whether or not the interloper enters the one who calls the shots, not the guy who's sitting on the throne? Isn't his throne standing dependent upon a background order of law and civility and normality, which once it's gone, makes it very unclear what's the currency of this new order? Bank accounts? I don't think so. I think the currency of this new order is Mad Max-like brute force. So I don't know how you discipline your security people. Don't you need security against the prospect that your security people will turn on you? And won't they wake up one day and realize that with these dystopian hordes of starving masses wandering the countryside, they're the only thing standing between you, Mr. Billionaire, and, the rabble? It seems to me the guy with the gun is, at the end of the day, the guy who's calling the shots.
So in the excerpt from Douglas Rushkoff's book, he raises something like this to the small group of high wealth individuals who've called him in to consult with him about this. And they say, well, what should we do about our security forces? And he says something like, well, you kind of have to just treat them like human beings that are in this with you, that they're kind of part of your community. Otherwise, it's not going to work. And he said they kind of harumphed and didn't like, they were looking for a kind of like ironclad economic or technological solution to this problem. And I think that this is one of the ironies in your utilization of the most advanced technology we have in order to isolate yourself. You're essentially putting yourself into a state of like civilizational regression. right? How does this not degrade to a war of all against all? If there's no intervening institution, if there's no intervening social contract, if there's no intervening anything like that through which you bind yourself to other people. So the impulse to survive, the impulse to sort of carry on, to save yourself, necessarily hastens in some kind of conceptual way. And I guess if there's a guy with a gun who's outside your door in a very real way, hastens the kind of degradation of society that you're trying to escape. In other words, there's no way to escape it. You're enacting it through what you're doing. You're a part of the process that you're trying to get out of. When you reduce your relations to other people to these terms of these transactional, nakedly transactional terms.
Couldn't the guy with a gun guarding your door problem be solved by technology? Maybe you don't need the guy. You have a drone. You have one of those automatic dogs with a machine gun on top of it.
Yeah, I mean, that's possible. That might solve your problem in terms of you're no longer worried about like ex-Navy SEALs, infiltrating your home. But then you're dependent on that technology too. I mean, do you know how to fix a Boston Dynamics robot dog with a machine gun mounted to its head? I don't. There are other problems that are involved in that. There's no perfect fix. There's just something that feels like unethical about the whole thing.
Well, there is something ethically problematic about the vast disparity of access to resources that is the premise of this entire conversation. Billionaires. Maybe the existence of billionaires is somehow an affront to our ethical sensibility. It's a cliche. No one needs that much money to live. That's true. It's another cliche. Nobody deserves to have that kind of vast disparity, the benefit of that kind of vast disparity in access to resources. I suppose we could try to defend that position. So this is a derivative. This is a kind of second order problem. It derives from the existence of the vast wealth disparity in the first place. And this may be the least of the things that we need to worry about, the hypothetical in which the world comes to an end and they all retreat to their bunkers. Maybe the day-to-day influence that their billions have over the way that we live, what we eat, how we, information that we have, maybe that's what we should be spending our time talking about.
All right, well, I want to press you on that a little bit because, they're either cliches, no one needs that much money to live, or no one deserves that much money, or they're axioms. Right. So, I mean, which is it? I mean, what do you think? Do you think that no one, quote unquote, deserves this amount of, deserves is an ambiguous term, but what do you think of this as a real question?
I think two things. I think no one deserves that. There is something problematic in my mind morally about the power that accrues to particular individuals because they happen to do what? Be good at guessing which way the bond price is going to move. And they can put their money behind getting the correct answer to that guess, and they can multiply their money. And so they end up with $10 billion of assets because they're good at trading bonds. And therefore what? Therefore, they own the mountain. They own the ocean, the seaside. They own the food supply. They own the forest. I can see there being a problem with that. But I also think empowering the state to take away what they've earned on behalf of a political program, hasn't that been tried? Isn't from each according to his ability, to each according to his need? That's not a new idea.
I've heard it somewhere. I can't remember where.
We've got the 20th century to point to look at the implications of having that idea brought to fruition with real government power, with armies behind it, with the state police behind it, and so on and so forth. And as far as I could tell, it was a disaster for the countries where that idea held sway. So I don't like the idea that people sit owning the mountain, but I also don't like the idea of a radical, ideologically fueled revolutionary movement deciding. You remember that scene in Dr. Zhivago where Loury comes home from the war to the townhouse?
I've never seen
And
Dr. Zhivago, but explain it to
you
us.
should see Dr. Zhivago, in my opinion. I think it's worth seeing. Anyway, Loury Zhivago comes home. It's a wealthy family. They've got a townhouse on the square in the city. He's been away at the war for years, and the revolution has happened. The Bolsheviks are in power. And the local commissar has occupied his family's home. And his uncle and his wife and the baby are up in what used to be one bedroom of this vast estate. And they're huddled there. And you've got these crowds of people in the foyer and whatnot who are occupying the house because it was unfair that they had such a good place to live. And Loury is walking up the stairs, and the headstrong woman, who's the head of the committee that is now in charge of the house, says, all of this space for just 4 people, it was unfair. And Loury turns and he nods and he said, yeah, you're right. It was unfair.
Now, I want to say we do have broadly accepted, except for, some sort of radical libertarians, means of redistribution in this country, and they're called taxes. Now, here's an idea that would never work and no one would ever get behind. But what if you had a doomsday tax? You have targeted taxes on people making above some absurd figure a year, who hold some absurd amount of wealth. And those taxes go toward securing the country, securing those who don't have the means against doomsday scenarios writ large.
There's something I don't understand about that. I mean, by definition, doomsday is a circumstance in which not everybody can survive. So a pre-doomsday tax that puts aside resources to protect people from the consequences of doomsday isn't going to work, because when doomsday gets here, there's not going to be enough food to go around. Someone's going to starve to death. Most of the shelter is going to have been destroyed. These greenbacks that we have is not going to substitute for the lack of a system of food production and distribution or health provision or whatever. There are only going to be so many functioning hospitals. Most of the doctors are going to be dead. So my personal physician, whom I'm paying $5 million a year to take care of me.
There are other economic problems that I was kind of thinking about as we were talking that have to do less with what we would do if we could all pool our resources, and what to do with the fact that in large measure we don't pool our resources. And I had sort of proposed this to you, and I'm not an economist, I know nothing about economics, but it was just sort of like an idea that I had. It's like, what if there was a sort of bank run scenario that happened? Because, if investment in these bunkers got to a certain level that it started sending market signals. In other words, all of these rich people are really investing heavily in something that sort of says that they think that the world is going to end. Do we end up in a situation where there's a kind of financial panic and people start believing that any long-term investment in any kind of stock is pointless because there's not going to be a stock market? And so this brings about a situation in which there is no stock market because everyone believes there won't be one. So they all pull their money and put them in into different areas that's going to try to ensure their survival instead. I mean, is this plausible even, or is this just like me knowing one thing about economics and being like, I wonder if that will happen?
I can't make any sense of it myself, although I haven't thought deeply about it. I mean, what I'm thinking is the stock is a claim on the profits that the corporation will generate over time, which depends upon the anticipation that the corporation's products will be bought by other people or entities, and that'll generate profits. And I own a part of the corporation with my stock, so I get a part of that benefit. And that hasn't changed. Why is it that a handful, I mean, we're talking thousands at the most of very, very wealthy people spending a small fraction of their total wealth to secure themselves against a relatively unlikely risk, nuclear war, climate collapse, civil unrest. Why does that cause me to alter my belief that people are going to want to the services of Amazon.com or
It would have
Apple?
to be. It would have to be a different scenario than the one we're currently in, where I think you'd have to have a number of different factors. One would be there would have to be some kind of threat that could be more short-term plausible than anything we're looking at. Short-term as in like next 10 years plausible than anything that we're looking at right now.
Like the US and Russia go to war over Ukraine.
Yeah, something like that, but maybe even something bigger than that. I don't know what it would be. Let's just call it threat X. You would have to see investors who had long-term investors and relatively sure bets. I don't know, like Disney. Someone who's got like a huge chunk of Disney stock being like, I'm pulling out. There's not going to be a Disney 10 years from now. I'm taking my money and I'm putting it into like buying concrete.
That is going to be useful. I don't know about gold, but concrete will be useful.
Yeah. And you have enough people who are pulling out of Disney, who are pulling out of Apple, who are pulling out of whatever, and buying concrete and buying components for robot dogs. All of the things that if you're looking at the market, you're going like, whoa, whoa, whoa. All of this money is shifting over to this other sector, a sector that is only exists because the end is nigh. Should we be following the lead of these people? And the same thing that happens when a big investor pulls out of a large corporation, right? Other people pull out as well. So that was the kind of scenario I was imagining. And if you're going like, well, okay, no Apple in 10 years, that's kind of hard to imagine right now. What does that mean about what these people think the future is going to be like? And do they know more than me, et cetera, et cetera?
Yeah, I can see that. I mean, they do know more than you.
Yeah.
You watch their moves and you anticipate, you infer, they must know something I don't know. Look, they're getting out. Maybe I should be looking for a way out too, except there is no way out for me or you. Can we go back to this thing about the world has come to an end now? There's nuclear exchange and the climate has been completely eviscerated. And, you need a special hazmat suit in order to go outside of the compound because the radiation is so bad and whatnot. My guess is that the suicide rate in the colony is going to be pretty high.
Yeah.
People are going to be depressed as hell. How do you give life meaning in the bunker? Is it in the three body problem? I can't remember where I read this, where they have these long multi-generational space travel things because they're moving between stars and they can only travel at 0.2 the speed of light or whatever it is. It takes them forever to get someplace. You're born and you die on this vessel. Human beings are trying to colonize another star system or a planet in another star system, but I'm never going to get there. My children are never going to get there. My grandchildren are never going to get there. But eventually humanity will get there. What keeps these multiple generations confined to the spaceship functioning? Why do they continue to go on? What is the meaning of life? That looks like a hard problem to me. Inspiring people to apply themselves in a world in which there is no horizon. There has to be a future. Doesn't there have to be a kind of, we get out of this eventually, things get somehow restored or reconstructed. We're buying time here, but we're not committing ourselves to this as a way of life.
I mean, in the three body problem scenario, I think it's pretty clear, right? Which is that like we have a mission, and that mission is to save the human race, establish a colony on a planet in another star system. And so you can imagine that being a reason for living, especially if you thought you were the only ones who were going to make it. We have to keep going for the sake of the species. That to me is plausible. Now, if you're talking about life on Earth, that to me seems like a harder problem. And we're imagining this from a position in which we have, presumably, all three of us, things in our lives that give us a reason to live, whether it be children or some other thing, right? We wake up every day and we go, or most days, and go, I'm going to keep going. It's hard to think past that from this bubble of relatively fulfilled existence, how do you put yourself in a situation in which nihilism really is a very present factor in what's governing people's day-to-day motives and actions? It's hard to think past that, because I want to say, well, I don't have children, I'm not going to have children, and yet I have I feel like I have a reason to live. I feel like I have something keeping me going. I'm not going anywhere anytime soon. And yet I don't know if I would feel that way if I lived in a bunker, and I was like, well, time to watch Everybody Loves Raymond for the 5th time, in 3 years or something.
That is so depressing.
To take it to a more depressing place, I just watched a documentary about a man who spent 4 years in Nazi concentration camps. And then when he got out, the documentary is about the LSD treatment that he was given to deal with the trauma, though the word psychological trauma was not there yet. So it was called something like KZ syndrome or something, concentration camp syndrome. But the reason I'm bringing this up is in those 4 years in the concentration camps, he was not suicidal. He was determined to try to survive. And I think that's a common story. Even in the most horrible situations, a lot of people still want to live just because there's a natural drive to this. You're just, as a biological entity, as a human being, most human beings want to keep being alive. So it kind of seems to me that the conversation about what gives your life meaning, what gives your life meaning now? What gives meaning to life to people who live in, a depressed region? So it's not a spaceship. It's just a village in a place where the climate is not very good and there's nothing to do. You have people around, you have relationships, maybe you have work to do. You wake up and you have to do something with the day. So why would that be different in a bunker?
I mean, the concentration camp example is, I think of other people, other figures, at least I know off the top of my head, where who end up ending their own lives after surviving concentration camps. The poet Paul Celan, and the writer Tadeusz Borowski, whose book This Way for the Gas, ladies and gentlemen, is one of the best pieces of Holocaust writing I've ever read. Neither of them made it. And I think that what you're asking, Nikita, right, is an important thing, because and I don't know this. I'm really not trying not to, get out over my skis, but I imagine that one thing you might think if you were in that situation in a concentration camp is that your job is to survive. Your job is to keep living. That's your job. And to whatever extent you can, help others do the same. Now, when you get out, what's your job?
To testify about what you've experienced.
And many of them have seen that, and I'm sure it gives them, that's a big part of what gives their lives meaning. Now, if you're in a situation, like, we're not comparing these billionaire bunkers to concentration camps, but if you're in a situation in which there is no after, your job is simply to survive, and you've made it relatively easy for yourself to do that, right? Well, your job really isn't to survive, because you've made it so easy to do that, right? So maybe that's the problem. What is your job?
Well, your job is to keep humanity alive until you can leave the bunker and repopulate the earth. You're keeping the flame of humanity burning so that future generations can live the beautiful life that you've heard your ancestors. I'm thinking now about, like, the generations in the bunker.
Yeah, the concentration camp survivor can find meaning, can he not, in defeating the intent of the persecutor who wanted to exterminate him and his people. And damn it, I'm going to live. I'm going to live as a way of rebutting this genocidal intent. I wonder what's like that for the nuclear war survivor. Is there something that's like, you know, we blew it the first time around and we ended up, nuking ourselves to death. But I'm going to be a part of a renaissance, of a reestablishment of humanity on a greater, more humane foundation or something like that. I have to be a part of the solution to this problem. I can't just surrender. I don't know. I mean, this is all speculation here. That doesn't feel to me to be. How do you come back from nuclear war? I mean, where do you begin? I want to ask a different kind of question, though, because we have not just billionaires, but we have political leadership that also have a bunker. The guys who decide whether or not to push the button have a bunker. Is that something to worry about? If you can literally, by your discretion, initiate nuclear war, is it fair or prudent that you should have an inoculation against the consequences of nuclear war? Shouldn't you go down with the ship?
I mean, no one is inoculated against the effects of nuclear war. I mean, you may not get burned up, but you're not going to be like, well, okay, launch nuclear war on Wednesday. By next Thursday, I'm sure I'll be able to keep my brunch date with whoever. Your life is going to change. The real question is, like, if that's like a scenario that happens, world governments decide to start launching nukes at each other. Well, the second that button gets pushed, you don't really have a government anymore, because it won't be able to do the things the governments do,
including reach an agreement with the enemy not to launch any more nuclear weapons. In other words, DC has been wiped out and Moscow have been wiped out, but you still got, several hundred million people who are surviving, and somebody has got to negotiate the terms of ceasing hostilities.
Yeah.
So you need to protect the governmental functionaries so that they can effectively consummate a conclusion to hostilities. If they couldn't talk to each other, if they were all dead, the military functionaries with their fingers on the button wouldn't know when to stop pressing the button.
Well, yeah, but let's imagine that they all do it. They all launch strike one and they go, oh, this was a terrible idea. Like, let's not keep doing this. So then you've got like this sort of blasted wasteland that is these many countries. What does the government do? It seems like it probably wouldn't be able to provide services. Does it have? It's just done the one thing. It's one job. It's a you had one job situation. Like, don't let us get blown up, and then you did. You let us get. Does that government have any legitimacy anymore?
I don't think it's about legitimacy at that point. It's about who has armies, who has, power. And I think that protocols for a nuclear war include, like, I don't remember the details, but it's like the president and the high command are going to be flying around for a while. There's like a plane that is not going to land because, you want to preserve this structure of leadership. I want to mention one thing in response to your comment, Glenn. There's a thing I've heard, an opinion I've heard from this Russian political scientist, I think she is, who made the point. The conversation was about, should we worry about Putin starting a nuclear war or not? And she said, we should, because that whole class that is in power in Russia, if you look at them sort of like, what are their cultural characteristics? They're not very creative. They don't have strong family bonds. And I forget what else. She mentioned like 3 things that give life meaning. If you have children that you love and you derive meaning from your family, if you have work that you really love and it's creative, that can give you meaning. And if you don't have much of that and you're old, you're approaching your own death, and there's not a whole lot that is going to be left afterwards. Like, you're going to die, but you're going to survive in your kids or in your work or in your whatever. The political class in Russia, in her characteristic, I mean, this is a subjective point, but I think she knows a lot of those people. She says it gets dangerous when these people are approaching death just because they're old, because they don't have anything else to put meaning in apart from their own life. And so if I'm gonna die, why not everybody else?
I mean, in a kind of sick way, this brings us back to what we were talking about before this conversation actually started, right? Because we also have a political class in this country in which it could be said that death is closing in, and yet I mean, it's just a fact. People get old, okay? Like, and one of them is getting very old. And
that guy is only 6 years older than your humble servant here. So
well,
just be careful.
Fine. I'm not, I mean, I definitely wouldn't want you to run the country, but you're in better shape than the guy who is running the country. I'll tell you that.
I think that's a compliment. I'm going to take it as a compliment.
Mark, do you know if we've gone on a lot of tangents here, but the original topic, the bunkers, the millionaires who are buying bunkers, do you know if this is America-specific trend or this is a global
That's
situation?
a good question.
I think it is global. Most of what I've read comes out of America, and we'll link to a YouTube to if you do a search on YouTube, you can see people giving tours of like model homes, quote unquote, you know, for these bunkers. So we'll link to that. But no, I mean, I imagine that any country that has any kind of significant billionaire class is these ideas get around, you know, and it's not like Americans have a monopoly on this kind of thinking.
I would love to know what the Chinese correlate of this phenomenon is, because there are some Chinese billionaires and there's some Indian billionaires. And
I don't know much about the topic, but it sounds like there's something having to do with American individualism here. Like, didn't you have a lot of bunkers built in the 50s too, when people were concerned about the nuclear war at that time? And it's like, I haven't heard of this dynamic elsewhere where it's just a family who builds a bunker, right? The Soviet Union as a country was concerned about, I mean, certainly didn't have like individuals apart from the people in the government to be able to afford a bunker. But I guess in Europe, there was some wealth. I don't know if that was as much of a thing there as it was in the US. There may be a cultural component to it where it's like, if the society is highly individualistic and there's a threat of a nuclear war or whatever disaster like that, you're going to have individuals taking care of their own, of their family, of their sort of close circle. And as you move like closer to a more collectivist society, maybe it's not a single billionaire buying a thing for you. Maybe even if there are billionaires, maybe the billionaires pull their money together to try to do something for them as a community or the country or the government or whatever, but not a billionaire for himself, but people in collectives.
Yeah, I mean, homes of fallout shelters were a thing, and even I live in Brooklyn. I used to live in Greenpoint, Brooklyn, which is sort of the far north part of the borough, and on the water. And it used to be a big sort of shipping area. Lots of docks, lots of dock workers. There's a really beautiful statue in McGoldrick Park that is a kind of tribute to the dock workers. And the buildings on the block I used to live on, some of them have fallout shelters still, you know, so it could be a feature of a building or whatever. But I think there is something to the sort of individualism point, right? That it does seem like there's something not exclusive to Americans, but that fits in neatly with this certain kind of ideology, right? Where it's almost like the hypertrophic, parodic notion of American individualism is this idea that you're going to be the last guy alive on Earth, right? So you need to think of yourself in that way.
You know, I just had a thought. October 7th, the Hamas terrorist attack in southern Israel, people retreating to their safe rooms.
Mhm.
You know, a lot of the firsthand accounts I heard about people who were victimized, Israelis who were victimized by that attack, had a piece of the story was the family was in the safe room.
Mhm.
So I'm wondering the idea of the safe room, the industry of producing safe rooms, the disparity between wealth and non-wealth in the quality of the safe room, whether that's a thing in Israeli, contemporary Israeli society. And
Yeah.
I'd be interested to know what's written about that and how people are thinking
Mhm.
about it.
Yeah.
You know?
I'm sure it must be, right? Because whenever you
Yeah.
have the construction industry, there's like a certain amount of shadiness that goes on in there. I had a friend who was in Israel on October 7th during the attacks. He was there with his family, his 2 young children, and his wife, and he was in a safe room with another family, and just the dynamics within the safe room that he
Yeah.
described were like, he was saying he was trying to keep, one of his kids as an infant didn't know what was going on. The other one was like 5 years old and knew something was going on, but didn't know what. And he said him and his wife are trying to keep the kid calm. And she's like, what's happening? And the guy's wife said, well, you know how on the playground sometimes more than one person wants to use the slide at the same time, and there's sometimes a fight. She's like, that's what's going on right now, and we just have to stay down here until the fight stops, and it'll be over soon.
Wow.
Meanwhile, their neighbor's kid was telling their neighbor's family was telling their child, they want to murder all of us. They want to kill us. And, my friend had to go over and be like, can you just chill out for a second? Like, we're trying to just get our kids through this. Whatever you believe about what's going on is what you believe, but come on, man. Like, we can't leave. And imagine that, but you don't ever get to leave.
God, what a situation.
Is this where we end?
Yeah, I mean, it's a pretty depressing
Well,
thing.
I have a question for Mark, which is long-termism.
Yeah.
We did a conversation about long-termism,
Yeah.
and so now we're talking about bunkers. All right, is there a connection, or is it just a coincidence that you have come up with both of these topics for our edification?
I have 2 thoughts on this. Okay. One is that there is some kind of connection, I guess, through me, just the sort of things that I'm gravitating towards. I mean, they're kind of opposite sides of the pole, right? Long-termism as a thing that says that we need to start investing our resources now.
Did Samuel Bankman-Fried have a bunker?
I'm sure he had a lot of property. I don't know if he had a bunker.
Try Googling that.
But that was going to be my second point. Now, when we had this conversation about long-termism initially, right? Well, so first, I think they're kind of diametric opposites in a certain way, although I think that they're both kind of toxic in their own particular ways, right? Long-termism saying that we need to mortgage our future, our present, in order to pay for our future in all kinds of ways that could end up hampering us, right? And causing pain, and also kind of create this sort of like intellectual / financial / technological elite that, or give more power to the one that we already have. That really risks sliding into a kind of tyrannical situation. And this is kind of the opposite, right? Where you have an elite that's convinced that there is no future, or there might not be one, and they're preparing to cut and run and do so as individuals. So there's that. The second thing I want to say is we had that conversation about long-termism and about what turned out to be Sam Bankman-Fried, a person who I didn't bother mentioning the name of because I didn't think it was important at the time. And then less than a month later, this guy is all over the news. His operation blows up. He's going to prison. People who were in his organization are going to prison. It's this mess. It totally, in the minds of some, delegitimizes the claims of long-termism, et cetera, et cetera. Now, look, I'm just saying, maybe I'm the key factor. All right. Maybe I'm going to bring down this whole industry just by speaking it out onto the internet. And I will have solved this problem simply by proposing that we talk about this. Who knows? And if that happens, then I am going to start A, gambling, B, investing more in stocks, and C, setting up a kind of scammy consulting business with like way inflated prices. So it's been nice working for you, Glenn, but I got my future planned out.
So I have to say this. I Googled SBF bunker, and what do you know? So this is from October 2023. FTX allegedly wanted to buy Pacific Island country to build Doomsday bunker for effective altruists.
There you go.
So this is a part of a lawsuit. Citing recovered internal communications between the younger Bankman-Fried, so this is his brother, Gabriel Bankman-Fried, and the executive, FTX lawyers allege that the memo outlined a plan to buy Nauru, an independent country in the Pacific Ocean with a population of about 13,000. The document
and no extradition treaty.
The document allegedly floated the idea of being a, quote, bunker/shelter on Nauru in the event of, quote, some event where 50 to 99.99% of people die, to ensure the survival of most subscribers to the effective altruism ideology recently made famous by Bankman-Fried's older brother. So there you go. And I guess if it's the effective altruists who survive in a bunker, then, you know, what do you live for? Well, now you have a society, like the only people who are left on the planet are people with the right good ideology that are going to plan better this time, and they're not going to deal with the nuclear war the second time because they're effective altruists. They're going to build a better society.
Great plan. I wonder how it's going.
All right, guys.
All right. This has been fun. We're going to try to do more of these going forward for our paying subscribers. And, just as a little kind of bonus thing. And so let us know what you think in the comments.
Look forward to hearing it.